So, imagine you were lucky enough to become successful and famous for several years, only to get romantically involved with someone younger and later be known best as someone's main squeeze. This is what happened to Poison Ivy, and this, dear viewers, is, with all due respect, the biggest downgrade in comic book history, at least for me. Now, before I even begin, I just want to make this very clear, because some people don't bother to watch my videos before going for my throat. So, love is good, love is great, love will always beat out hate, blah blah blah. I guess what I'm trying to say is that this isn't a hit piece, nor is it a hate video. I absolutely adore the characters mentioned here. However, some things need to be said. So let's begin. For those who may not remember, Poison Ivy used to be one of the bad guys. And I don't mean naughty, mischievous, or an anti-hero. She was plain bad, and one of the very best at it. In fact, unlike the other Batman rogues running around Gotham, Ivy had a purpose outside of money. She had a vision and a mission that set her apart from just about any other DC villain. You see, Ivy simply wanted to preserve nature and plant life, and make the world green again. Of course, her way of doing this was never exactly the right one, and she did have way too much fun erasing humans whenever she could, which actually made her come face to face with some of DC's greatest heroes, and thus becoming a star, something that very few characters have been able to do. In fact, some of today's biggest comic book A-listers had to work their way to the top, slowly and sometimes painfully. This, by the way, is much more difficult for female characters, whose success is rarely comparable to the main heroes. Yet, I can't think of any other character who achieved success as a solo act, only to later become little more than a sidekick to a newer character. At least not like Poison Ivy, who on her own managed to achieve the type of success that only happens once in a lifetime, going from Batman's second most iconic villainess of all time to being one of comics' most complex and layered tragic figures, amongst many other feats that defined her legacy, and that were, quite frankly, given to another character. But more on that later. For years, Poison Ivy was widely considered to be one of comics' most recognizable female characters, and one of DC's biggest bad girls, who had gone up against DC's finest heroes, and was involved in some of the most important events in DC. That is, until 1992, when Ivy finally debuted in animated form on Batman the Animated Series, on the 5th episode titled Pretty Poison, which introduced the character to a whole new generation, and thus becoming even more famous than she already was. However, Batman the Animated Series also marked the end of the character in a different type of way. On January of 1993, the episode Harley and Ivy premiered. This episode marked the first interaction between Poison Ivy and the brand new character Harley Quinn. The Harley and Ivy episode was very well received and became a fan favorite, and with good reason, because it's a really good episode, really. After Batman the Animated Series ended, the show sort of morphed into Batman the New Adventures. This show featured a modified Ivy with a new radical look, and of course, a steady partner. And the thing is, I don't mean a partner as in just in crime, if you get what I'm saying. This, by the way, was confirmed in the comic tie-in Batgirl Adventures #1. But once again, more on that later. After Batman the Animated Series and Batman the New Adventures, Poison Ivy's fate would change forever. Because after those shows, it would seem like Ivy would rarely be allowed to stay away from Harley. And I know this may sound exaggerated, but sadly it's not. And you can fact check this anytime you want. Just check any Poison Ivy appearance after Harley's introduction to the DC main continuity, and you will see that with the exception of the Uma Thurman Poison Ivy live-action version, Harley is either present or featured in a flashback, or at least alluded to or mentioned somehow. Almost as if Ivy was no longer allowed to exist without Harley. For example, Ivy became a supporting character in Harley Quinn's highly successful first ongoing series, where she basically played the role of the sexy roomie party girl in Gal Pal, which is a far cry from her focused, dominant personality and the goal-oriented criminal she previously was. However, after Harley's series was cancelled, they were still featured together quite frequently. Though, to be fair, Ivy did get to stretch her legs on her own for a while. And this is where Ivy shines best. Because on her own, Ivy can be as dark as she wants. And sensual, yes, but also delightfully psychotic. And what's even better, without Harley, Ivy showed her human side by taking care of some of the city's orphans who were living on Robinson's Park. Unfortunately, Ivy also spent a lot of the 2000s by Harley's side, becoming a supporting character on Harley's life in basically every Harley Quinn ongoing series she's had since the first one, where she does little more than following Harley around on her adventures. There's also been instances where Ivy gets a leading miniseries or a special with no apparent ties to Harley, which eventually include Harley anyway, especially by the 2010s. For example, on 2016, Ivy had her first miniseries, titled Poison Ivy: Circle of Life and Death, which had a great premise and an excellent creative team. Sadly, the series falls back on the same old habits, and the same can be said for the other miniseries or specials in which Ivy partook in, where we get more of the same. Then finally on 2022, Poison Ivy finally had her first ongoing series, which is a major feat for a character conceived as a villain or supporting character. The series finally gave back Ivy some of her agency, allowing her to have adventures that don't revolve around her former girlfriend. And to be fair, the series has a few decent moments here and there, but there is a problem that still lingers. You see, while the stories don't revolve around Harley, she still has appeared in about half the series, whether physically, in flashback form, or even in hallucinations. But somehow Harley always appears somehow. And it's this which keeps Ivy's stories from achieving greatness, and Ivy from growing as a character. Now, I won't delve into how insulting it is that Harley had her own solo series back in 2000, just a few years after being introduced in Batman Taz, while Ivy had to wait almost 60 years to be given a chance. And this, dear viewers, is just shameful. Animation-wise, Ivy would reappear on 2004's new Batman show simply titled The Batman, where Ivy is much younger and is actually Batgirl's former friend. Now, despite the liberties taken by the show, Ivy is once again dragged back to Harley, although to be fair, not from the very beginning, mostly because Harley hadn't been introduced yet, but certainly by the end when Harley was around. And this, by the way, is also transferred onto the comic tie-ins. After that, Ivy would reappear on Batman the Brave and the Bold, where she once again starts as a main villainess, only to once again become Harley's sidekick-ish. The Harley and Ivy duo also appears on Teen Titans Go, DC Superhero Girls, and Justice League Action, where Harley has a couple of segments dedicated to herself, but Ivy is only allowed to appear with Harley by her side. On both versions of DC Superhero Girls, Harley and Ivy are frequently seen together just like always. And then came what I firmly believe to be the worst iteration of the character so far. And that would be the massively successful Harley Quinn series starring the Big Bang star Kaley Cuoco, where Ivy, played by Lake Bell, is nothing more than a supporting character and love interest for Harley. And that's about it. There's really not much to her on the show. Oh, by the way, the series also tried to pair Ivy with Kite Man before she runs away with Harley. And what's even stranger about the series is that it basically swapped Ivy's personality with Jane from Daria. Now, just to be clear, I adore Daria and Jane. And Daria is one of my all-time favorite shows, but to be honest, Jane is as similar to Poison Ivy as I am to Angelina Jolie. So once again, the writers have to mold Ivy into something she's not so she can fit into Harley's little world. On top of that, and as much as I adore Selena, it was painful to see Ivy gushing over Catwoman like a fangirl, which is quite demeaning for someone like Ivy who is extremely proud. To behave in such a way, Ivy fangirling on someone, anyone, is wrong on so many levels, not to mention that the word's totally awesome and yes, queen shouldn't even be on her vocabulary. The Poison Ivy from the comics would probably vomit from seeing how she was depicted in the show. And before you even say it, yes, Selena and Ivy have worked together at several moments, yes. And they can get along just fine for a certain amount of time, sure. But neither of them have ever fangirled over the other. That's just wrong. And what the newer writers seem to forget is that these characters are not supposed to be like us. You know, average people who can get excited over trivial things. These characters have larger-than-life personalities and have bigger things going on other than sex and beer. Sadly, comics and animation are not the only venues in which Ivy has been paired with Harley, as there is a lot of merchandise featuring these two, such as toys, coloring books, clothing, and even statues. But to be honest, this part actually makes sense, as it's all about the money and you can get more with two characters than one, so it's fine. This, by the way, also applies to video games, where she is also paired up with Harley in some way, shape, or form. Now, to be completely fair, Ivy has had moments in which she's not around Harley. For example, Ivy appears on the TV shows Gotham, Batwoman, and the animated show Young Justice, where she doesn't have any interactions with either Harley or Harley-inspired characters. So there you go, there's at least a few tiny instances where Harley and Ivy are not a thing. Unless I forgot any other adaptations where they don't interact with each other. But regardless, going back to my previous point, just think of it this way. For a while, Selena and Ivy were the go-to Batgirls in comic books. Two strong, independent female characters who carved their way on a difficult medium, trailblazing the way for newer generations. Until Harley came along and disrupted things, by sort of leeching onto them. And just for the record, I'm perfectly fine with Harley's success. Harley is immensely popular and I'm quite proud of her for that. She raced to the top in a way that very few characters have done, and that's to be admired. And she is a great character. But the problem is that in the process, Ivy became nothing more than somewhat of an extension of Harley, and a shallow, pale version of what she used to be. And I'm sorry, but that is terrible. Ivy shouldn't be on anyone's shadow. She's a star and she deserves to be treated accordingly. Selena and Ivy had to crawl so characters like Harley were able to run, and they should not play second fiddle to no one, not even Harley. And for those who might give examples of other characters where this happens, such as Batman and Robin, well, no. Both Batman and any of the Robins have a vast amount of adventures which do not feature the other. And sure, they can pop up every now and then given their rich history together, but they are allowed to exist without each other, where Ivy isn't, or at least not anymore. It doesn't matter where Ivy appears, or if it actually fits the story, or what continuity it takes place in, or even the format. Harley is always there some way, somehow. And that goes without saying, the strange similarities between these two. You see, another issue I have with the Harley and Ivy dynamic comes from the fact that several of Poison Ivy's accomplishments and traits were given to Harley, such as her spot on the Suicide Squad, which actually helped launch Harley into superstardom. When Ivy was a member long before Harley, during the greatest era of the team. Or for example, being a part of the Birds of Prey, which Harley also ended up doing after Ivy. And then there's the fact that DC celebrates every Harley Quinn milestone, like her 25th and 30th anniversary, while Ivy is nearing 60 and hasn't gotten anything, not even a mention. And as poopy as that may be, I sort of get it. Harley is the moneymaker here, and Ivy will never be as lucrative as Harley. There is just no comparison whatsoever. But I just wanted to bring it up because it's beyond messed up. Now, here's the thing. I'm not opposed to Ivy being with Harley every now and then, or them being a couple, or Ivy having a human connection, or even becoming close to someone, as this actually makes the Poison Ivy lore even more interesting. However, having a human connection and being someone's sidekick/lover are two completely different things. Harley is, I believe, a little too big, too loud, too colorful, and too different to work with someone like Ivy. And yes, of course, opposites attract and all that, but in this case, given Ivy's big personality, well, I think it's a bit of a stretch, as Harley is the type of character that enters a room and sucks the air dry. And for those who might say, okay, but what's the big whoop? They're twinsies now, no harm done here. Well, no, not when you have to alter, change, or downplay someone's personality and character to justify her being with someone. Because once again, Harley is a bit too much to handle, and Ivy is, or at least was, notorious for having a bad temper, not to mention a short amount of patience. Let's face it, Ivy simply wouldn't tolerate this much Harley. And if you're going to go around molding established characters to fit certain stories, a bit like they did with poor Tim Drake and his little wee-wee, well then what's the point of using established characters in the first place? Why not create new ones where nothing is set in stone and pretty much anything goes? Now, I'm sure I'm gonna get a lot of poop for this one, but I still want to ask, what about you, dear viewer? Do you like the dynamic between Harley and Ivy? Are you okay with Ivy being little more than Harley's girlfriend? And most importantly, don't you miss the real Poison Ivy? As always, thank you very much for watching. Hope to see you in the next one. Be safe and well. And remember to please have mercy on me, please. Try not to get too personal on the insults, and please keep in mind that I'm just a nerd. And we all have our opinions, so please stay classy.